This is CB Up for Discussion, a podcast series from Community Business where we tackle DE&I and wellbeing hot topics with special guests from across Asia.
Hello, my name is Visha Dhapa, and I'm the Program Manager at the Diversity, Inclusion in Asia Network at Community Business. And I go by the pronouns of she, her, and hers. And I'll be a podcast host for today's episode. Today we are up for discussion with Ted Khoo, the Associate Director of Group People Sustainability at AIA. Ted has been the vibrant part of the network since 2022, and although we've crossed paths before, today presents a special opportunity for us to dive deeper into his journey and insights. Ted, you've had quite a remarkable journey. So originally from Malaysia, you've made Hong Kong your home for over a decade now. You're also proudly representing the LGBTQ plus community and have been in a loving relationship for 17 years. So congratulations for that.
Thank you.
Professionally, you're dedicated yourself to driving a meaningful change and advocating for the diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging in the workplace. So Ted, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Vijita, for having me. I'm really excited to be part of this podcast.
Awesome. So let's dive right into your journey. So what initially motivated you to focus on your efforts in this area of diversity, equity, and inclusion?
It started when I was a kid. Like you said, right, in the introduction, I'm from Malaysia. So growing up in Malaysia, for those who are not familiar with Malaysia, it is quite a conservative country. Even in last year, 2023, Swatch created a LGBT pride Swatch watches collection. It was banned in Malaysia. And there were even talks about creating a conversion therapy for gays in Malaysia. That is the context that I lived in. So when I was young, I knew I was very different. As young as 8 years old, I think, I knew I was different. I was like, playing Barbie dolls with my girl cousins, just not doing the normal things that a boy would do. And growing up in a Christian home, we go to the church every Sunday and we hear things like homosexuality is wrong. And then you sort of think about, maybe there's something wrong with me. I grew up in a cocoon, and in year 2001, there was a pivotal change in my life where I went to the UK. I studied psychology. It was when I started to realize that, hey, I am who I am. This is who I am meant to be. Took me some time to accept myself, and then sort of got the courage to come up to my university friends. And that was a game changer. People were so accepting of your sexuality and your identity. And then after graduation, I went back to Malaysia. I sort of like, do I really want to go back to Malaysia? But good thing is I was able to join a global consulting company. Being a global firm, they do have a more accepting and welcoming work culture. Although within Malaysia still, there's certain things that are still being more conservative, but I have a very supportive manager and mentor back then. I came out to him and he understood it. And what was really inclusive about him was that he said, Ted, this is new to me. I don't know what is LGBT, but I am here to support you, to be on this journey with you. And that really created such a strong lasting impression on me. But the big change was in 2012, I believe. I had a surgery. I went into ICU. During my stay in ICU, my partner could not see me in the hospital simply because he's not part of the family. And that was when I started to realize that, hey, life is too short. That's more. We need a change. Hence, I spoke to my manager, and then sort of he was very supportive of a transfer to Melbourne office. Going to Melbourne, that was one of the best thing in life. You come to a country where they are accepting of you as an LGBT. Even for my partner, he was offered a visa dependent partner without any marriage certificate. However, like I said, I came to Hong Kong 10 years ago. So during that transfer, coming back to Hong Kong, it was like, yeah, Hong Kong is a vibrant location, it'll be more accepting, more welcoming than Malaysia. But then it's sort of like, it still felt like a few steps back. Even for my partner, we wasn't given a visa partner. And although we had domestic, I think in Melbourne, in Victoria State, they call it the Domestic Relationship Declaration or Registration. But the medical benefit wasn't offered to my partner simply because I don't have a marriage certificate. So through all these personal experiences, I feel that there is something that we can change, especially in Asia. Certain markets are much more accepting, much more advanced, but being in Hong Kong, we can do more than that. That's how I started my journey in DEI.
Thank you for sharing that, Ted. And that is a remarkable journey that you just mentioned. And I'm glad you're okay now after the ICU injury.
Yeah.
Happy to have you here. Okay, moving along, I think you also sort of mentioned what motivated you to be in this field. So moving along, so transitioning to a specialized field like the D&I space can have its own challenges. As you mentioned, like coming back to Hong Kong, it felt like a few steps backwards. So could you share what resources have been particularly helpful to you during this transition?
Yeah, so in my career, I was focusing on organizational change management. So I was really, and doing studied psychology and organizational psychology. It made me have this a little bit more understanding around the individual differences and about the human behavior itself. However, I only touched into the DEI space about a couple of years ago in this current role. There are abundance of resources available out there. You just Google search, you see a lot of articles and research from McKinsey, from BCG. But then when you look into details as you read into it, it's like, they are so Western-centric. Mm-hmm. What does DEIB mean in Asia? Asia is different. We are more of a collective culture. Whilst you talk about Western, it's more individualistic. How do I apply those frameworks to Asia? Like what you have mentioned, Diane. Diane was one of the best things that happened for me to build this capability and to really understand what DEI means. You have a lot of research and a lot of articles. For example, I think one of the most impactful research that I've read was the LGBT and mental health research that you launched a couple of years ago. And through that report, you were able to explain how each of the different countries in Asia and the perspective to LGBT and the challenges that they may face, even with the mental health situation. The other research that I've read was not the research, but this up close and personal discussion podcast that you have. It was with, if I remember correctly, it was Professor Edmund Choi. Mm-hmm. More the home run, right? Really talking about the healthcare services for LGBT. Those are the things that really help me personally to understand what it means within a DEIB in Asia. Mm-hmm. What are the challenges that each of these diversity groups faces, and also what are the things, practical advices that we can do, whether it's individual or for the organization. I think the other thing that really helped me connect with a lot of the professionals outside is this DEIB professional network. Mm-hmm. It's a WhatsApp group. It was the lead is Alicia from Bloomberg. We do have quarterly roundtable discussions on key topics, whether it's on people with disability or on social mobility. I think those were really able to have candid, honest conversation, and you can get to learn from other professionals around what are the things that they're doing in their company that can inspire and maybe we can apply and work. So I think those were some of the key resources that have helped me to understand what DEIB is.
So thank you for sharing all the resources that you mentioned. I'm sure although we have the resources, you might have had some challenges relaying back to your organization, promoting D&I at your organization. So could you share more about that?
When it comes to DEIB in Asia, one of the key challenges that I face, or something that I'm really trying to focus on, is authenticity. Mm-hmm. What I mean by authenticity is around being true to yourself, being true to your employees around what DEIB means. When I talk about D, you've got diversity, which is all about the representation. But then what does equity and fair from the people practices that we can give and offer and ensure that it is applied to our employees? And then around inclusion, are we creating inclusive policies and practices that are inclusive for our employees, irrespective of their diversity attributes, so much so that they feel part of the organization or part of the community? So being that authenticity means that looking inwards as an for the organization before we even start talking about promoting it externally. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the cases where we are very mindful around saying, oh, we change our logo with a pride flag, to demonstrate that, we support LGBT, or we sponsor certain communities, because we want to demonstrate and to show to the world, to attract candidates from the diversity group. But then the question that I will always ask myself, are we being authentic about it? Or are we just going into the environment of DEI washing, creating that false pretense that we are an inclusive environment, right? So before we do that, I think that is a key challenge, right? And to build that authenticity, it's not an overnight thing. It is a journey that we have to go through, because when you talk about diversity, the other complexity that you're going to put it in will be the intersectionality, right? When you talk about LGBT, what if I intersect with people with disability, and even for women, or one of the other things that we are looking at is social mobility as well. If you all look into it, companies may have a broad-based policy to say that we do not discriminate based on certain diversity attributes. But if you then zoom down to a specific intersectionality group, are we supporting them enough? So I think that is one of the key challenges that I think, especially in Asia, that we would face.
Thank you for sharing that, because I have heard of such cases where, let's say, a company or promotes themselves as a inclusive company and does all the things to, let's say, hit the quota. But when they hire someone from the community, any diversity community, they realize that they don't have the resources to, keep them in the company and promote them and all that. So definitely authenticity is definitely one of the challenges. I agree with that. So Ted, how has your work in DEIB influenced your personal values and perspective on leadership and organizational culture?
I think two words that stand out for me. First will be respect, and the second is empathy. If I want to talk about creating an inclusive work environment, first and foremost, we have to respect the person for who they are. And I want to quote this quote from Howard Schultz. And what he said was, the most important thing to be is to have that authentic self. And when you are being authentic yourself, you'll be able to respect the other person. And like we mentioned around the various life moments that one person could go through, whether you are going through whichever life moments that you may be going through, that is very difficult, but you just have to have that respecting that person as an individual and showing the empathy, that understanding from their perspective. Right? Even Simon Sinek also mentioned this quote: "We are not in a team because we are together. We are in a team because we respect and we care for each other." So I think those two are the key values that I see that it's very important, if you want to drive the DEIB agenda forward. Okay, the other thing that I also want to talk about is around training. A lot of companies will actually go, launch and deliver a lot of training, mandatory learning on unconscious bias or on microaggression. Some even go down to creating a 2 hours workshop on inclusive behaviors. But I think we need to look beyond just the workshop. What I would challenge the companies or everyone who are listening is around looking at the enablement part. So if I sort of link back to the examples that I gave to myself, right, that my manager had when I told him that I was gay, I said, "Ted, I do not know anything about it. I will learn. I will be on this journey together with you." So if I were to put it in today's situation, imagine your managers in your company. If someone were to walk up to that manager, even after completing the inclusive 2 hours workshop, and the employee walks up to you and said, "Manager, I am transitioning." Number one, does the manager know what to say? Does the manager know what they should not say? Does the manager know what are the support structure available in the organization that is available to support the employee through transition? So I think it's that enablement model and framework that companies need to also look at beyond training. And if you look at the various diversity segments, for gender, talk about caregiving. We talk motherhood is very common, but caregivers, what if I need to care for an aging parent? And then if you're looking at the generations, what if someone were to talk about retirement? And me being a young manager, if someone were to ask me about retirement, I seriously do not know what to say. And I seriously do not know what are the support structures available in our organization for them. So I think it's that enablement piece that needs to be really looked at in detail, in depth by the organization. Because if I will look at it at the key life moment, that is going to be the make or break conversation that is going to make that employee feel whether they are included as part of the company, they feel included in the community, or they are just being excluded totally.
That's so true. The training, the post-training, like what's next after the training. So in your pivoting to like the success, so in experience, what key factors have enabled your success in implementing DE&I initiatives in the organization?
Key success factors, I also call it like the key considerations that the companies would need to put in place, when you want to look at DEIB. If I go broad, let's look at the markets or the country that you're in. What are the cultural nuances of that current society or the current location? What are the regulations that are supporting it? If I use Malaysia, for example, talk about LGBT. Well, it's a no-no in Malaysia. Not something that you can go out and loud and being proud. There is no regulation to protect the LGBT. There's no discrimination law for it. And the examples that I showed to you, that I explained earlier on, was around the conversion therapy as well. I do remember there was a university who wanted to do a LGBT Pride March in 2017, and it was just shot down, right? Because we have to be sensitive towards that. Then the other key consideration that we have to put in is the organization. And let's put it one level lower. From the key success factor, I think even in the previous podcast that I heard and a lot of research that we have read is around having a policy. So policy is good, standard is good, because having that clear commitment that you put out to say that you do not discriminate based on any of the diversity attributes, which is good. But what companies need to do as well is to look at the next layer down, like what you had mentioned around the hiring, around the promotion, reviewing every single standards or standard operating procedures. Are we treating our employees in a fair manner? Are we promoting people or our employee based on merit? Are we hiring people based on merit? Or are we just meeting a specific diversity target? So I think those are the things that companies need to be very mindful of, as they drive the DEIB agenda across. Then if we look at a company, if you sort of zoom in a little bit smaller to the community itself. So for example, whether it's gender or people with disability or the LGBT, we need to have a platform or a opportunity for this affinity group to be together. As whether, I think people call it employee resource group, business resource group, or employee networks. I think that is also very important, because you want to create a safe space for these group of people to come together, to support each other, to learn from each other, and to network with each other. I think that is one of the key things that would help drive this inclusion agenda in the organization. And then if I zoom even further down, is the leaders. Mm-hmm. Especially in the context of Asia. The leaders, I don't know about you, but if you ask me personally, I would always look up to my leader as the role model. I think maybe it's applied and common across the organization, but especially in Asia, the leaders do set the tone for the organization. So we need to have the leaders to be advocating the change, championing DEIB, being present, being able to just be in the events, to be able to say, hey, I support you and I do appreciate you and I respect you as an individual. I think that is some of the key success factors.
It's really interesting how you mentioned leader, because when we go back to the first question of how you started your journey, it also because a leader motivated you to, be true to yourself at the workplace and outside. So that's really inspiring. And of course, in this realm, we will talk about the ROIs, the metrics. So my next question is, how do you measure the effectiveness of your DEI initiatives in the organization? Are there any metrics or indicators that you find the most useful?
I think for companies, typically there are few or two key ways that you want to measure the DEIB in a sense. Firstly, I would say is what is needed by the regulators or the investors. Every public company, you will have to release your annual report, you will have to release your ESG report, and within that, you will have specific diversity matrix that you have to disclose, whether it's a representation of gender and also by levels and stuff. I think that is, I would say, it's a bare minimum that you have to disclose. But what is even more challenging and even more important for organizations to measure the success is the equity and the inclusive part. So, for example, if I talk about the employee networks that I've mentioned, right? A lot of the companies will probably want to measure things like, how many members are growing? Are we getting more members? How many events are we delivering per year? What is the participation rate of it? Are we seeing an increase? Those are very good, but those are just numbers. Yeah. But how do you shift and change the way you measure the success of the employee group? I mentioned that the objective of employee group is around learning, supporting, and networking. How do you measure all these things, right? If I just zoom into the LGBT, even within that, it's a little bit quite complex, the way we have to measure. First, if you were to measure the people who are members, who are LGBT members of the network, you need to measure, do they feel that it is a safe space that they can connect, that they can share, that they can learn from other seniors who are LGBT as a role model for themselves. And then for LGBT, especially in Hong Kong, what about those who are not out, who may also want to be part of the community? How do you measure that they too feel that they are part of the community, that they have that sense of belonging? And then, even for us, we always believe that even if I have an LGBT network, it's not only for LGBT.
Yeah.
It's for the wider population or everyone in the organization. And how do you measure those people? Did they learn something from the network that they have joined, the events that they have joined? Do they understand what it means to be LGBT? Are they able to change their behavior to be more supportive and inclusive of the community, whether it's LGBT or gender or other than the diversity attributes, for the matter? So I think that is the different level of success measures that you have to look at. One is from a regulatory perspective. The other part is around moving away from just representation data like participation rate into something more deeper, the inclusion and the belonging measurements. I think that's how you can measure the success of your DEIB initiatives.
And that's definitely the harder.
Very difficult, but it is not impossible.
Love the energy. I think for some organizations who are just beginning, I think even the bare minimum, you mentioned the gender, that is also a challenge for them. So are there any tips on getting at least the bare minimum? Like at least you have the number of, let's say, a certain gender ratios.
I think the fortunate part is that I work in HR. There are many sort of checkpoints or touch points where data can be collected.
Okay.
Right? Even as in any company and all, when you join a firm with your offer letter, when they have to create your, say, employee benefits, your gender data is there. Start from there. Right? And then from the gender, you may have that, and then you have your date of birth. Can you split it and do a little bit of analysis to look at what are your generations of that particular group? Those are easier to collect. But what is even more difficult to collect would be things that needs to consider local regulations as well, and the sensitivity of it, and the whether the individual be comfortable of disclosing those type of data. What I meant is people with disability. And also your sexual orientation. The other thing is around your pronouns. Like you mentioned around your pronouns, I go by he, him, you go by she, her. Does your HR system allow the flexibility for people to even disclose them, even if it's a they, them? So I think those are some of the, I would say, the hygiene data that companies can collect, the gender and the generations. But for the others, you will need to really look into it on how you want to collect it, whether it's allowable and with the regulation. And I think the key thing that I always ask myself before I go into the more non-hygiene, advanced type of data is the question, what are you going to do with that data? So what if you get 10 people disclosing that they are gay? What are you going to do with the data? If you don't have a good reason for doing it, then I think you have to ask yourself again, before starting to collect those data.
Thank you for sharing that. moving back to your own reflection, like your own achievements, personal achievements, what would you consider your greatest achievement in the realm of DEIB so far? And what impact did it have on organization or in the community?
On a personal note, I think one of the key thing, because like I mentioned, I was in Malaysia when I was young. I was growing up, or not growing up. When I started my career, I did not have a role model. I did not have someone that I like. Oh, you're gay. Okay, let me talk to you. Let me ask you about your experiences. How do you navigate through, being gay in Malaysia? So with that, I'm also thankful for community business. You have that mentoring program. I thought that was really, really very beneficial. And, I hope it was beneficial for my mentee, but for me, it was really a sense of able to contribute and help other young LGBT out there to navigate the current working environment, and things that we explore are, do I come out to my boss? What are the implications if I do come out to the boss? I think those, being as a sort of I would say an experienced LGBT, but being me, able to share my own personal experiences and help to coach and guide the younger ones, in navigating through that. But at an organizational level, I think we have gone through, as an LGBT person, I'm a co-chair of our Pride Network. I think that has been a journey. So we started with one person, we grew to 5 members, and now we grew to 15, all in 6 months.
Wow.
But it's because of all the groundwork that we have done, right? Communicating around about LGBT. We first started with celebrating Pride, annually in our office. It's trying to raise the awareness, that, hey, we see you, we hear you, we know about you, and now we are starting this network. So I think that is, and seeing the team growing, and at first I thought, I was the only gay in the company, but no, we actually got so many. And one of our recent event that we organized as a Pride Network, all members came up beyond a panel discussion to literally first time in their life, coming out in front of everyone who was there to share their personal experiences being an LGBT in the company. So I thought that was so powerful, I think that gave me goosebumps when that happened. And I thought of, even from the planning side, when they were saying that, yes, I'm more than happy to come out in front of everyone. Whoa, that gave me goosebumps. And it's one of the best things that actually happened.
I know I got goosebumps when you mentioned that as well. And I think we're all blessed to have you as the role model and the leader to, guide us. And thank you for also being part of the mentoring program, as you mentioned. I'm sure the mentee had a lot to learn from you and your experience and your wisdom. And finally, this is the last question that we ask to all our guests. What do you think is the biggest way we can make a ripple of change throughout society?
To me, I think it's this concept that my senior leader has mentioned, and a lot of things this concept has been going around in my company for quite some time as well. It's the 1% improvement. It's about behavioral change. Don't wait for others to change. You can make the change. And one of the exercise that I tried with my team, we talk about inclusive language, right? What I meant by 1% performance change is around, you can't suddenly just say that I'm going to use inclusive language tomorrow all the words that I use will be very inclusive, will not have any gender. Even I think if I play back and listen to this podcast, I may have been using some non-inclusive words. I do apologize for that, but it's that one step, each step that you take to make you better. So going back to the example that I did a test with my team. I said, okay, we always say you guys. But then I said, did you know, in all the team, 5 of us in the team, but I'm the only guy. Why would you say you guys with a plural S? Shall we make a step change? Let's just be mindful and just say, everyone. Just this one change. And I tell you, it wasn't easy. It was not easy. Some were like, oh my God, Ted, you make me so stressed. And even when you're doing presentation, she said it's like, I'm always constantly thinking and make me not able to share and present effectively. I'm like, but it's okay. That is part of the habit change. It's not going to be easy. But if you can just pinpoint one thing that you're going to change, start with that. And then once it becomes a habit, then start with the next one. Because every day, if you change that bit, over time, you will see that effect. That is all about behavioral change. I think if you want to have that ripple effect, do something that you can control, and then you will have that spreading the whole sort of inclusion and fostering this inclusive environment across you and around you.
That's awesome. I love the 1% change and starting with the inclusive language. I mean, the term you guys is like the first step we can all start with. So thank you, Ted, for being on this podcast. And I'm sure the rest of our listeners will also start with this 1% change. Thank you.
Thank you, Vijita. Thank you, Community Business. Glad to be here.
Thank you for listening to CB Up for Discussion. For more information about our work across Asia, head to the Community Business website.